Hello guys, my name is Matt. This is my story. So in my last video I talked about fulfillment and the reasons why I think fulfillment comes from confronting and overcoming obstacles that you encounter in your life. And I'm going to pick up where I left off there and build on that and take that concept a little bit further. I think by now most of us accept that obstacles are something that we're going to encounter and confront in just about any endeavor that we're going to set out to achieve in our lives. Kind of like this rainstorm here while I'm endeavoring to make this video. In theory, you could find fulfillment from doing just about anything, but that's not really that helpful as far as trying to find a direction for your life and what kind of obstacles you should try to tackle in trying to find your own fulfillment. And of course, me and you and all the rest of us are constrained by time and space, and we can only really be doing one thing in one place at one time. So it's logical to think that we ought to pick the highest value obstacles that we can to go out and try to tackle those, and in that way try to build the greatest sense of fulfillment for our own lives. I want to point out that we don't always get to pick which obstacles it is that we're going to confront in our lives. We might get to choose some of the obstacles, but we're definitely not going to choose all of them. Some of them are just going to be things that we inevitably run into, and then we're going to have to figure it out after the fact. Okay, now what do we do about this obstacle? This video isn't really about that. That's going to be a topic for other videos, but this one is more about specifically, okay, if I want to start moving my life in this direction to find my own sense of personal fulfillment, then what types of things should I be doing? What types of obstacles should I be targeting in order to build my own sense of fulfillment? And for that matter, if we are at a point in our lives where we get to choose the kind of obstacles that we get to confront, at least some of the obstacles that we get to confront and overcome, that's a very fortunate position to be in. And we should honestly approach that with an appropriate level of gratitude, that we are not so overwhelmed and overburdened by unanticipated obstacles that we have the time and effort and inclination that we can choose obstacles that is a target, that this is what we're going to aim at, and we're going to start moving ourselves in this direction and build fulfillment for ourselves. So again, for me, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that this all came about from my process of journaling. I set out in my journal, as I was going down this path for myself, I set out with a concept that I want to be a 70-year-old guy someday. So for me, this is going to be 30 odd years into the future. A 70-year-old version of myself. And I want that 70-year-old version of myself to be a guy who basically left nothing on the table in his life. If there was an opportunity for something, he did it. He grew, he reached the maximum potential of what he could be given the life that he was living, and just had this very full and rich and meaningful life. And I want to, it's a challenge that I wrote for myself, that I want to meet that guy one day. I want to see if I can meet that guy one day 30 years from now that did all those things, and what that would be like to meet that version of myself one day. So this sounds like a lofty aspiration, right? But again, since I'm human, just like the rest of us are, except for Mark Zuckerberg, who's clearly a reptile, I can pretty much only be in one place doing one thing at a time. There's going to be some things in my life that I'm going to have to forego in order to do other things which I think are going to be a higher priority for me and are going to move me further. So I need a framework for what are going to be the highest priority things that I can do with my time and energy. So after working through this quite a bit in my journal and also talking with my life coach about it, I narrowed this down to a few, well, there's going to be a couple diagrams for you. The first one's going to be a simple Venn diagram, and I'm going to start popping it up. It's probably going to be like right about here somewhere. The first circle in this Venn diagram is going to be the realm of my relationship that I have with my wife. Being that I'm married, and this is a lifetime commitment that I've made for myself and my wife, in order for me to be the best, most accomplished version of myself that I can be, this is going to have to be the major factor, a major factor in that. So if that's going to be the best version of that relationship that it can be, then I have to be the best version of a husband that I can be. Nobody else can do that except for me. I don't want anyone else to try or even think about trying. That's going to be on me. The second circle in the Venn diagram is probably not too surprising, but that's my relationship that I have with my kids and the realm of my life as a dad. And it's exactly along the same lines. I'm the only dad that they have. The only person that can be a father to them is me. And it's not to say they can't have other positive male role models in their life, but they're only going to get one dad, and that's me. So again, if I want to be the best version of myself, to meet a version of myself 70 years from now that accomplished everything, did everything he could, then being the best version of myself as a dad is also going to be a major component of that. And I'm going to have to figure out what it is that I need to do for myself, the obstacles that I need to overcome for myself that are going to let me be the best version of a dad that I can be with those guys. And the third circle to complete this Venn diagram is the realm of myself. And this is the realm where sort of a lot of the other things in life fall into. So it's like my profession, my friendships, my personal friendships and my professional relationships that I have, my hobbies and interests, my health, my personal fitness, all those things all roll into this sphere. And so if you're in the same sort of phase of life as I am, and you look at this diagram, it's like, man, this is already a very busy, with just three main components to this. It's already an incredibly busy diagram. There's a lot that gets packed into this. And how do you find enough time to do all of those things and do them successfully? Because we're talking about a lot of major sustained effort over a long period of time, essentially a lifetime. So this is where you start getting a lot of value out of finding the overlaps, things that I can do together with myself, my wife, and my kids. Those areas are where we can start maximizing the potential of the time and effort that we have, because it's not just one realm, it's overlapping of several realms, right? And so trying to find things that you can do, activities that you can do, which inevitably lead to obstacles that you can overcome, ends up being very valuable, very high value targets for you to aim at. The second thing that I personally think of when I look at this Venn diagram is that it's actually pretty intimidating. Because at the heart of each one of those realms is a major underlying question. And that question is, for example, for my wife, that question is, how well do I understand my wife? Because I think I understand her pretty well. I'm married to her, and I think I understand her pretty well. But every once in a while I run into a circumstance where I realize, man, I really need to step up my game as a husband here. I thought I had this down, and I just realized that I need to make a major improvement here. And then, of course, the same thing goes for my kids. How well do I know my kids? Well, I think I know them, right? Because I've been there their whole lives. I was there when they were born. I've seen them all their lives, and so I think I know them pretty well. But every once in a while, I run into something where I say, man, I didn't know this about my kids, and I need to figure out, what's it going to take that I need to be a dad in this situation? And then, of course, for myself, or for yourself, you've probably experienced this too. I've been living with myself all my life, and I think I know myself pretty well. And I've been intentional over the last, particularly over the last decade or so, to invest a lot of time and effort into understanding myself and who I am as a person. But every once in a while, I'll run into a circumstance where I look at myself and I look at my life and I think, man, I did not know this about myself before. And they're profound moments, and they're actually really cool moments, because these are moments of opportunity where you can think, okay, well, now this is where I'm going to take myself to the next level, right? But it's also pretty intimidating, because at least for me, and if you think like I do, these are major responsibilities that are represented here in these three spheres. And of course, you want to do the best that you can with them. And for my vision of myself, the 7-year-old version of myself, to come true, I need to be on my game and all these things and making these improvements. So it is a big responsibility. So if it feels intimidating, it's probably not surprising if that's what you're feeling, because that's a very significant thing to contemplate. So really, all these circles in the Venn diagram, they're not stationary realms that just sort of are what they are into perpetuity. There's an evolutionary process that goes on with all of them. So not only are they already time and energy consuming, but they're also moving targets, because you have to constantly keep growing in each one of those realms, which also takes more time and energy. So this brings us back to the original point, that it's important that if we're doing this, we're trying to do this in the most time effective, efficient way possible. I also evolved another diagram, again after a while of journaling here, And I'll pop that diagram up here in the same spot. It's a simple XY axis diagram that I'm sure we all remember from high school or maybe even junior high. The vertical axis is the fulfillment axis, which is what we've been talking about here up to this point. And then the other axis here is the alignment axis. The horizontal axis is the alignment axis. And that's a term I haven't really gotten to yet, but I really, really like that term. I was at lunch with a buddy of mine and I heard him use that term. And I as soon as I could, I wrote it down in my journal. I thought, man, that's a great term. Alignment is basically the sum of the experiences and efforts that you've been putting out in your life that have gotten you to this point, particularly professionally. It's like the direction that your life has been headed. So I'll give you an example here. For me, I think I've mentioned previously in my videos, I've been involved in commercial real estate for a little over 20 years now. It's by far the thing in my life that I'm most aligned to more than anything else. And that's not to say that I'm not aligned towards other things. There's other things that I've aligned myself towards in addition to commercial real estate, say residential real estate. I also am fairly capable with economics, business-related stuff like management, leadership, things of that nature. I have some alignment in a lot of different things, but by far the thing I am most aligned towards is commercial real estate. And unless you're in commercial real estate like I am, you're probably aligned towards something else, or maybe several other things. But again, it doesn't have to be incredibly precise. It's more just a concept, and I think that you probably get it because we're all generally aligned towards something. And you probably don't have to think too hard about what that thing is. It's probably going to be pretty obvious. Now that we've got our two axes labeled, let's start filling in these different quadrants here. So the quadrant that's going to be in the lower right-hand corner is going to be the quadrant where your productivity is. So this is where you're essentially maximizing your alignment and not a whole lot of thought for anything else. And a lot of people end up living their lives in this quadrant, or a lot of their lives in this quadrant. And you may be living here as well. This is sort of the quintessential example of your office worker that starts his career working in a cubicle, grinding away in his cubicle, and then after a few years, maybe eventually he moves up to a management office and he grinds away for years in the management office, and maybe at some point he hits the senior VP, president, or maybe even he's lucky enough to hit the executive row, and then he grinds away in an executive suite, and eventually he retires and he's basically given his life to this company and the success of the firm. But maybe he doesn't necessarily feel very fulfilled in doing that, but he probably made a lot of money. If you're willing to do that, you can usually make a lot of money if you can sustain that kind of a commitment, and that's the reason why a lot of people end up living a lot of their lives in this quadrant. And in a way, that's not bad. It's... Oh, hey, here's a turkey. Hey guys, check this out. Boom. They came to say hi. These guys were gobbling earlier during this storm. There's another one over there. Probably hearing me talking and wanted to see what I was up to. So in the way that our economies are organized, at least for most of us, if you live in somewhere in a relatively modern world, the way our economies are organized really rewards specialists. And the more that you can specialize and get proficient or hyper proficient in a fairly narrow realm, the greater your rewards are in our economy. So it makes sense that people end up putting forward a lot of sustained effort in this productivity quadrant because that's where a lot of the major rewards are, particularly monetary rewards. The flip side of that is this quadrant is very low on fulfillment. So the opposite of this quadrant is going to be the top left quadrant. And that's going to be where you have a lot of fulfillment, high on fulfillment. You're going to find a lot of your intrinsic rewards there. That's where you're going to be like your hobbies, for example, or just sort of your fun family time, or charity work that you might do, traveling that you might do. That's going to be where this quadrant is. That quadrant is where a lot of the happy, feel-good stuff that we all enjoy doing in our lives, that's gonna fit into this spot. It's a really cool spot to be in, and maybe not quite so many people put forward effort in living in this quadrant, but some people do, and maybe the quintessential example you could think of is sort of your classic starving artist, the person that just cares so much about their art that they try to devote every last minute of their lives to it that they can, and they just sort of eke out an existence, and usually it's sort of supplemented by assistance that their family or maybe close friends give them, or maybe they work some kind of few hours at a nominal job to sort of try to survive, but otherwise they're giving every last minute that they can to their art because that's what they groove on. That's what keeps them going, right? This quadrant's really cool, and a lot of fun stuff can happen here. But of course, the flip side to this quadrant is you can't really make a lot of money in this quadrant. There's not a lot of people that are giving you monetary rewards for doing stuff in this quadrant, and by and large, it's probably not where a lot of your technical skills are devoted to this quadrant. So the quadrant that you guys probably have already figured this out now, the top right quadrant is where these two things overlap, and this is where you can get paid for doing things that you enjoy, but also you get a sense of fulfillment from, essentially meaning that you are getting paid to confront and overcome the obstacles that end up being the most fulfilling for you over the course of your life or whatever duration it is that you're doing this thing. And that's a really cool, if you can figure out how to do that and get paid for it, that's an incredible thing. And I'm jealous of you. I've told my wife's a teacher, and she enjoys teaching. That's not to say that she doesn't come home tired or that every day is always a lot of fun, but she gets a very rewarding feeling from her teaching, and it's her fulfillment, and she gets paid for it. And I keep watching her, and the other thing is she's good at it too. If you sit in her classroom, it's like, man, she was put here on this earth to do this. She's great at it. And I just feel so jealous when I see her doing that. Like, man, that is so cool that you figured this out for yourself and you get to do this. I really want to figure this out for myself so I can experience something like that too. So if you have figured that out for yourself, if you've unraveled the thing where you get paid to do the things that you feel fulfilled in doing, and confronting those things and overcoming those things, and growing in the way that you want to grow, in a way that feels rewarding for you, that is a very fortunate position to be in. You should have a lot of gratitude that you have that part of your life figured out, because there's a lot of people in this world that don't. And so this is why I've labeled this top right quadrant the high value quadrant, because honestly, if we all could, we would all want to spend our time here. I feel like I certainly would. This is where you're going to get the most reward, both in terms of your intrinsic rewards and in terms of financial rewards, if you can live in this quadrant. So it's your high value targets. It's what you ought to be aiming at if you haven't figured it out already for your life. That's a good place to try to figure out how to move more of your life into that quadrant. Now, the last quadrant here, the lower left, this is going to be the opposite of the high value quadrant. So of course I'm going to call it the low value quadrant. And this is where it's very low on productivity, very low on fulfillment. And it'd be very easy to sort of brush over this quadrant and say, like, well, we don't really need to talk about that, because like, why would you want to spend any of your time there? It's kind of, the whole thing is pretty pointless. I understand that sentiment, and certainly that question is valid. Why would you want to spend any of your time in this quadrant? But so long as we're here, just as a mental exercise, let's stop and think of the different things that we spend our time on in any given day, and what things might actually fit into that quadrant. Like, for example, how much of your life do you spend staring and just sort of scrolling through your smartphone, or playing games on your smartphone, or video games, let's say, or reading news that's not really newsworthy and doesn't really affect your life in any way, or arguing with strangers on the internet, or feeding addictions, let's say, or sitting on the couch and watching TV shows or sports or whatever it is, okay, or spending time arguing with your spouse or your family members about something that really ought to be solved in, say, like a 5-minute conversation, and you can move on, but you just sort of hold on to that, and it takes up a lot of your time and causes a lot of negative energy. I mean, when you look at this quadrant, there is a lot of stuff, a lot of ugly stuff, and unempowering stuff, and just, really distasteful. It's not really fun to think about. But really, if you want to get the most value out of this graph that you can, I think it's really worthwhile to sit and think about, like, well, how much of my time am I really dedicating to this? Because that's time that you could otherwise be spending on something else that's positive, right? Because two of these quadrants are positive in at least one dimension, and the other one's positive in two dimensions. So any time that you're spending in this lower left quadrant is time that you could otherwise be doing something that's positive in some way for yourself. And if we only have one life, the more time that you can move out of this negative quadrant and move it into a direction that's positive, that's great. So now that I laid this out for you, I'm going to start making videos about more specific things, the things that I'm intentionally targeting to do with my time and energy as a way to start to build fulfillment for myself. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for watching. I know these videos tend to run a little bit long, but I'm trying to pack as much value as I can into it, because what I'm trying to do is build a community of people that are interested in the same things and they want to move their lives in a similar direction. And if you have any comments or thoughts that you'd like to share along these lines, I'd be happy to hear from you, because it's a learning experience for me. I'm sort of sharing as I go along here, and I feel like it's something we're all just sort of learning for ourselves. So feel free to drop me a comment. I'd be really happy to hear from you. I'd be really happy if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to keep doing this as much as I can. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.